Right. My next story goes to, I saw a bunch of stories this week about Greta Thunberg, the 16-year-old climate activist who's in the U.S. right now getting ready for the upcoming UN climate summit that I'm sure we'll have lots to say about. And I read a few interviews with her, and there's just a bunch of points that she made that I actually found quite interesting. So I'll just read a few of them, and I'll have a few interjections along the way. So in one interview, she makes the point that what I want to do now is, what I want people to do now is become aware of the crisis that is here. And she says that that includes shaming those who need shaming. It's what I've been doing for quite a while now, and it actually has a lot of impact when you speak truth to power, when you don't bother to be polite because this is such a serious crisis and we cannot focus on what we can and cannot say. Now we must speak clearly about what is happening. When asked how she found the confidence to speak so clearly, Thunberg said, "I just know what is right and I want to do what is right. I want to make sure I have done everything in my power to stop this crisis from happening, to prevent it." And I actually think like that's there's a lot that's admirable in that attitude, in the sense of like, yeah, if you think that something's right, you should be willing to speak out. You should be polite. And my real question is, why in the world don't we see fossil fuel supporters doing the same thing? That is, you hear all the time people pointing out, like, look, the fossil fuels are vital to our economy. They can't be replaced. And yet you hear almost no public voices. And to the extent that you do, including people in the industry whose very jobs and potentially freedom, is at risk, given that some of these executives could literally be thrown into prison, depending on who gains power. Like, the fact that the point about, well, we have to be polite and we can't say anything, critical about solar wind, even though, having laws that outlaw fossil fuels and replace them with solar and wind would be a catastrophe for your friends and your family and the entire country. And the idea that we're just going to tiptoe and be polite and nobody has the confidence to speak out and say, like, this is completely outrageous, morally wrong, and destructive, and that the only people who are speaking out in that way are completely ignorant 16-year-olds who want to take away our freedom to use power. I mean, that is, that outrages me much more than the media's fawning over Thunberg. She goes on, there a few more points she makes. She was asked what was the most important thing the public could do to help prevent the climate emergency, as the media now calls it. And her answer, I thought, was pretty interesting. She said, "The key is to try to understand the crisis. I think that once you fully understand the climate and ecological emergencies, then you know what you can do as well. And of course, there's a lot of things you can do in everyday life, but we cannot be focusing on these individual things you can do. We have to see the full picture." And I mean, I definitely agree with her that the number one thing is to understand the issue and even to understand the full picture. But of course, she can't actually be talking about the full picture because she's never talking about the value of energy, including the value of affordable energy to help us cope with the challenges of climate. But nevertheless, that is that focus on understanding being at the forefront of the issue, I think, is really crucial, because that's why I don't think this is something that, for people who do want to stand up, this is not about holding placards and chanting, and it's not, about having or only having, some clever memes or some clever, 2-minute YouTube videos. It is actually help people understand the superiority and indispensability of fossil fuels, and help them understand the true nature of its side effects, including the impact of CO2 on the climate. And, it's an actual real education in energy and its side effects that I think are necessary in order to know what's right, and then in order to persuade others of what's right. And then I'll end with a few more points she makes. When everyone else seems to just compromise and have this double moral that's, yeah, this is important, but also I can't do that right now and I'm too lazy and so on. I can't do that. I want to walk the walk and practice as I preach. So that's what I'm trying to do, because if I am focused on something and if I know something and I decide to do something, then I go all in. And it seems like others are not doing that right now. So, unquote. And one final point I'll make about this is she definitely has not gone anywhere close to all in. That Thunberg, despite warring against fossil-fueled civilization, is still a parasite off that civilization, couldn't survive without that civilization, couldn't have gotten to the United States without that civilization, and couldn't be waging her war in that civilization without relying on it. And so, no, the only way to go all in if you oppose fossil fuels is basically to abandon society, is to abandon civilization, and you could go live like a primitive somewhere, although even then you'll be cashing in on all of the knowledge that you got while you were raised in that civilization that was only made possible by fossil fuels. But I mean, I think that, as much as this is a completely ignorant person who there's no reason that we should be listening to, and we're only listening to because she's a puppet for politically correct ideas, I think this moral clarity that she has and conveys, and this willingness to, bluntly make distinctions between good and evil, that is something that really should be emulated, but it should be emulated from an intellectual, informed perspective, and from a perspective that actually values human flourishing, rather than this completely, let's call it politely, violating this very dictum, confused, ravings of a 16-year-old. Steffen, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think your last point is really hitting the nail there, because there's something putting me off with this activist. And, there's a German version, Luisa Neubauer, of her in the German language realm. And so notice how these high school teenagers never engage in any real discussion. They never, as you said, they are not intellectually informed. They say, I want you to panic about something that I don't define. And so it's almost like a religious theme where some revelation comes from somewhere else that I can't explain, but I just know the truth, and everyone who's against that truth is evil, and everyone who's for this is good. And so it's not... So the moral clarity needs to be based on something that is explainable and real and informed. And, then you can say, oh yeah, this is like something like fascism. You can explain why that is bad and why it needs to be fought. And then, you can say, well, this is what we should do, and this is what government should do. But these climate activists, these low information climate activists, I would say, they are not speaking truth to power. They are threatening government power, which is the strongest and most violent power imaginable, against people who keep us alive every day. And so this moral outrage needs to be not based on some emotional attachment, but on some very rational, careful analysis on what's the right course of action, and how do we get our power or energy that powers our civilization. And you can't just take that away. And it's really, to me, it's a real outrage that nobody asks them, complex questions about the actual thing going on with not only climate, but also with energy, right? So, because there are serious questions. If you follow the wrong prophet here in this theme, you're going to kill a lot of people, and that's a big responsibility. And so we can't infantilize this issue, and I think these activists are doing that.
Yeah, and I definitely want to underline that point that you made, because I was being slightly tongue-in-cheek. It's like, I definitely don't think that this is like, you know, this is not the right approach to the issue, just getting the conclusion wrong. Like, it really is an issue of, you need to have understanding. But what I think is just striking to me is how people who actually do have an understanding, who have thought about this issue, who understand the value of energy, who understand the state of climate science, it is very rare that they have any sort of backbone and any sort of, uncompromising moral attitude and willingness to name those things. And the few who do, we deserve eternal gratitude toward, and particularly given that they're actually speaking truth to power, because they're the ones who are increasingly being silenced, and who some people literally want to ban from the debate. And and so it's more vital than ever when you have that kind of dynamic, when the people with an actual understanding and willing to speak truth to power are increasingly drowned out of the debate. In fact, one of the things that has happened in the last few weeks is it's become clear that Google it's not right to put it as censoring it, but they're making Alex's Prager video on the Green New Deal very hard to find, so that if you search for what's the deal with the Green New Deal, the exact title of his video, you don't get any videos with that in the title. Instead, you get a bunch of things praising Ocasio-Cortez that are viewed much less than his video, which has, well over 1 million views. And certainly Google and YouTube have the right to do that, though they should be open about what they're doing. And though it should be very disturbing if an important, crucial debate is being regarded as undebatable. And, if you think about what's going on with an activist like Thunberg, it's like she doesn't just want to shut down the energy that we need. She wants to shut down the other side. One of the things that she said is that she wouldn't meet with people who disagree with her, even if they wanted to, that, they should just shut up and listen to the scientists, and that she's here to basically frighten us into action. So please don't mistake my, what would you call it? Don't mistake the kind of point that I made for an actual view that there was anything positive going on there. I think it's, it is the complete opposite of what a climate thinker is, and that's what we should all aim to be, as well as activists for what we regard as the true position, which is that energy is vital and it's being opposed.